Now, the last of the best strategies is to try to attract new customers to the market, right? Now, this is a goal, of course, for any firm. We're always trying to bring new customers in. And so, again, this is trying to convince people to buy something that they didn't already buy or that they didn't know they needed to buy. So the example here that's over on the right-hand side between L'Oreal and Beiersdorf is kind of an interesting one because they attracted new customers to their market by trying to market to people that wouldn't have already been interested. So basically what they did was they sell lots of skin creams to women. It's a huge market, health skin creams for women. Not a lot of men participate in that market. What they did was they branded a bunch of skincare products for men, tried to advertise them with manly advertising, and tried to make it so that more men would buy it. They didn't have to really do much R&D. I mean, more or less, they were the same creams. They just slapped new branding on it, and they and actually it was quite successful. Nivea for Men kind of took off. It's now a pretty sizable brand for them, and so they brought new customers into the market. And if they do that, and enough new customers, so enough men see that other men are using these skin creams, they're like, oh, okay, maybe they're not going to buy Nivea, but they'll go to one of the competitors. The market as a whole is getting larger, and so everybody's better off. So you have a low risk of retaliation. Okay, so this is. Again, there are some unique strategies here. Trying to attract new customers to the market usually means looking at a new way to shift your a new way to shift your focus. So how do we bring people in that wouldn't have already used the market? So one of the ways, again, a kind of an interesting one, is after sugar started to be put in everything, people started to get see the same opportunity in the sugar market that the sugar market saw in the fat market. And one of the groups that took advantage of this was the Corn Growers Association. They used corn to make something called high fructose corn syrup, which is a really sweet sugar-like additive. And they embarked on a campaign to tell people that sugar wasn't good for you, and that what you should do is use this high fructose corn syrup when you were going to use sugar, and that would be better off for you. It was more natural, which I don't even know how they played that off, but they did it really well. And so, they took real sugar out of all the sodas, and now that's high fructose corn syrup. And they took it out of a lot of processed and packaged foods. And again, now it's high fructose corn syrup. And so in a really effective manner, they pulled the rug out from the sugar guys, just like the sugar guys pulled the rug out from the fat guys. Now, there are a couple other examples here, a couple other sort of interesting ways, things that you might not even recognize as strategies to try to bring in new customers to the market. So one of the ones that I think is sort of more pervasive right now is these efforts that are mostly presented to the public as what's the right word? They're mostly presented as humanitarian efforts to bring the internet to low-income countries, to people that don't have good infrastructure, so they can't have wired internet. They mostly use their phone to connect to the internet, but again, they have generally spotty cell service, so they're usually living in rural communities. But even in more developed, semi-developed nations like India, where there are still large communities of really poor, infrastructurally underdeveloped areas, even in the big cities, that don't have access to the internet. So you see these companies like Google and Facebook, Twitter, and even SpaceX, all sort of engaging in this. They seem humanitarian to bring the internet to the world, to bring the internet to the masses. But a more cynical view, which is at least the place that I typically operate in, I'm definitely a cynic, would argue that these are really just low-key strategies to attract new customers, right? So all of those companies, Facebook and Twitter and Google, make all of their money by selling advertising and doing other things that are related to the internet. And what they rely on is to continue to increase the people that are the eyeballs that are on their ads, and the people that are participating in their many various and sundry internet escapades. But they have essentially reached everyone in the developed world. Everybody with an internet connection has used Google. Lots and lots of people use Facebook. I mean, it's the dominant market, the dominant sort of social media at the moment in the world. It's penetrated lots of other countries, with the exception of China, really. And so what they have done is they've sort of reached a saturation point, because what they've done is reached everyone who really has a good, solid connection to the internet and has the incentive and need to use the internet, right? So how can they continue to get bigger? How can they continue to generate portfolio momentum? Well, they can connect more people to the internet. They can connect all of these rural folks and these folks in developing nations and with poor infrastructure to the internet. And so they're putting up, 1 million satellites to provide satellite internet. And Facebook is giving away basically free phones in Africa and India, for incredibly selling for almost nothing. But the hitch is, of course, that they're Facebook phones. So the only way to get on the internet is to have a Facebook account and go through Facebook. And that's made in India that strategy is so successful for Facebook. It's their biggest market now. They have more consumers on Facebook in India than anywhere else in the world. And so all of these strategies to try to and of course, I mean, I'm not a total cynic, right? I don't think that there's no value in that. I'm not trying to say that they're doing a bad thing, but I don't think that I'm not one to ever give credit to a company for doing the right thing when there's clearly a profit motive that at least goes alongside them doing the right thing. Okay, but that being said, attracting new customers to the market again is the thing where all competitors benefit. If all these people now have access to the internet, then any firm that makes their money on the internet is going to have some benefit from a giant influx of new customers, regardless of whether Facebook has the most benefit. And that means there's going to be low risk of retaliation, and in general, a relatively sustainable growth in revenue. Okay. Now the caveat with all of these things is that, and as we'll see when we talk about the empirics, is that revenue growth is not as sustainable as return, not by a long shot. So eventually, we're gonna reach the market point. We're at the saturation point where the market's gonna get as big as it can get. There's not gonna be a way to get existing customers to buy more. There's not gonna be new customers that aren't already in it. We are gonna have sold one of everything to everybody that's willing to buy it, and that'll be it. There won't be any more revenue growth. And the only thing we can do is jump back up to number one and try to create a new market. Okay, so there is always sort of a limit here to how sustainable. But these are the most sustainable because they're the least likely to encourage retaliation by competitors. Now, the silver medal group, and there's just a couple here. The first one is that you gain market share in a fast-growing market, and so this is sort of tied to all of the things in the gold medal group, right? As the market gets bigger from portfolio momentum, as the pie gets bigger. If I am able to grab a larger slice of that pie at the same time, I am going to have only a relatively small risk of retaliation, because everybody is still going to be better off in absolute terms. They may not care so much that I also got a little better off in relative terms, right? And this can happen for two reasons. And the main reason why we wouldn't see retaliation is if I'm P&G in the hand washing scenario. I've run this big campaign, I've spent all this money, I came up with the idea, I advertised, and the market started booming because people started washing their hands more and buying more soap. If I gain a couple of percentage points at the expense of my competitors, they're not going to complain because they're all making more money anyway. And they're going to recognize that if they retaliate against me, they're shooting themselves in the foot because I was the one who helped them all out, right? Now, the other way is that I just aggressively try to capture on somebody else doing that, right? I am a soap company that sees P&G doing this. I know they're spending more money on advertising and marketing and things like that. I know they don't have as much money to spend on, say, sales. So I try to jump in and capture something on their end. I try to, I instead of recognizing that they're doing us all a favor, I recognize an opportunity for me to take advantage of them while their backs are turned. And this is definitely going to cause some retaliation. Okay, so everybody can get bigger. Some of those firms can get relatively a little bit bigger. If you go too hard or too fast, you're likely to cause some retaliation, and you're certainly not going to engender a big happy marketplace. Okay. Now the second one, and again this is a little bit worse, but this is the called bolt-on acquisitions. Okay? And what a bolt-on acquisition is a very small acquisition relative to the firm that is the buyer, right? And so what that means is, for instance, a large company buying another smaller company that is less than 5% of their firm size. Okay, so that's what we would characterize as a bolt-on. So that has to be 5% of the purchasing firm, right? So this isn't, an Apple and a Microsoft merger, two massive companies trying to combine into one super massive company. This is Apple buying a tiny little software company that nobody's ever heard of. And this kind of thing, it happens all the time. Okay? Apple, for like the last 10 years, has made on average one acquisition every 3 days. You've never heard of it because the companies they're buying, some small like 2-person team that made a specific software thing that Apple could use in the App Store to make purchasing better, or to fix a hole in their security, or to increase, or they bought a company that does the fingerprint scanner for the phones when they were doing the fingerprint thing, and they spend a couple $100,000 or a couple million, but for a company of the size of Apple, it's a footnote. Apple's worth almost $2 trillion. If they spend $1 million on an acquisition every 3 days, you'll never hear about it. There'll be companies that are just too small relative. Those are bolt-ons. And the important thing about a bolt-on is that it can fit directly into the company without any changes or functions. If they're just buying some software that can plug right into their existing software, they can take the team of coders that was working there, plug them right into the other software developers, and boom, it's like the company never existed. They just paid out a little bit. Okay, bolt-ons have to be that easy to integrate for them to create value. Okay, so and that's why they have to be small. They have to be easy to integrate. Once we are combining larger firms together, there is a lot of overlap. There's a lot of, and we'll talk about this, but there's a lot more costs involved. And because there's more cost involved, they're not creating as much value, if any. Okay. So the important part, again, here's an example for IBM. This is a really common thing for tech firms, these bolt-on acquisitions. It sometimes also happens in, say, like manufacturing industries, as you can imagine a case where a company like Ford, big car company, might buy a small manufacturer that makes a piece that would make the door handles on a car better. So they just buy it, boom, they just fold it right into the car. Nobody notices. It's a really small company, and the introduction and the integration of these two firms is basically seamless. And as long as that's the case, these can create significant value. Okay, once the acquisitions start to get bigger and more costly, then we start to lose any value that might be